Welcome to JS on Politics. I'm your host, Greg Borowski, and we've got a lot happening today, so we're going to get right down to business with what's ahead on today's show. We have new polling numbers from Wisconsin. We'll look at those and who Donald Trump may choose as his running mate. Then we'll dig deeper on what to expect from next week's Republican convention in Cleveland. Take a look at Donald Trump on the Truthometer. We'll also look at Lincoln Hills, the U.S. Senate race, and hit some more local issues. We'll give you this week's winners and losers, and we'll take some viewer questions. We've got plenty of guests here, but first we're going to go to a taped segment with Craig Gilbert looking at the presidential race. We're joined now by Craig Gilbert, our Washington bureau chief, who will be headed in the morning to Cleveland in the Republican convention. Let's start with the new poll numbers that came out yesterday from the Marquette Law School poll. And those showed that Hillary Clinton is leading Donald Trump in the state among likely voters 45% to 41%, and among registered voters, which is a slightly broader group, 43% to 37%. Craig, so pollster Charles Franklin described the movement in this poll from the last poll as smidgeny. So what was your takeaway on these changes, and what exactly is a smidgeny difference? Well,
there is some narrowing among likely voters, not so much among registered voters, and that's kind of in keeping with what we're seeing in some of the other polling around the country. But, the underlying numbers, the perceptions of the two candidates, which have been very negative in Wisconsin, remain very negative, and the differences there are, in fact, smidgeny. I mean, if you look at their softness with independent voters, if you look at their standing in their own party and with the other party's voters, not a lot of change. I mean, Donald Trump is getting a little bit more popular with the Republican voters. He was very weak before, but, they still have really high negatives across the board, and they're still really, really weak with independent voters. So they not only have some more fence mending to do within their own party, but, there's a lot of people, particularly independent voters, that are really still looking for somebody else to vote for.
Yeah, one thing that struck me, and you mentioned it in your story this morning, is that there were a lot of big events that happened in this period. You've got the Dallas shooting and the Hillary Clinton server scandal, and none of that seemed to move the numbers one way or the other.
Yeah, and we all know that, people are set in their ways. There's some deep partisan fault lines, but, some very dramatic things have happened in the last month. I mean, not just, in the world, in the country, the shootings in Orlando, the Dallas police shootings, and also in the campaign. I mean, Donald Trump's had an ongoing series of controversies. Maybe people are just kind of immune to that at this point. But then there was the big FBI email findings, which I think may be hurting Hillary Clinton nationally, but maybe because her numbers were already pretty weak here. There was no change in the percentage of people that find her honest, which is low. There was no change in her negatives at all. She did manage to kind of become as maximally unpopular among Republicans as you can mathematically be, because her favorability rating among partisan Republicans in Wisconsin is now at 1%.
All right. With a situation like this, and people aren't necessarily happy with either of the candidates, let's talk about third parties and how they may play a role here. Libertarians, the Green Party. What did the poll show when they're kind of thrown into the mix here in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so they do register. I mean, particularly the Libertarian candidate, Gary Johnson, I believe, was at 10% when it was a four-way choice that voters were offered that included not just the major party candidates, but Libertarian Gary Johnson and Jill Stein of the Green Party. She got 4%, but then you still had people saying none of the above. You still had people saying don't know. You still had people saying not going to vote. And again, when you look at those independent voters, you've got Hillary basically at 30%, Trump at 30%, and then you've got 40% either picking the third-party candidates or saying none of the above. And so that's kind of another, indictment, I think, of the choice that people are being offered right now.
All right, let's talk a little bit now about the vice presidential pick for Donald Trump. That announcement is coming tomorrow morning. A lot of the speculation has been on Governor Pence of Indiana and former Speaker Newt Gingrich. So Donald Trump hasn't taken the conventional route along the way. Craig, does that mean we're going to get somebody different, or do you think it'll come down to one of the two?
It's hard to remember a time like this when the short list seemed to be this short. Basically, of the known sort of political players on that list, we've been looking at Mike Pence of Indiana, we've been looking at Newt Gingrich, the former speaker, and we've been looking at Chris Christie, and almost nobody else. And that's a testimony to the fact that a lot of Republicans would not want to be Donald Trump's running mate, or he would not want them. And so that doesn't preclude a wild card. I mean, we know how unorthodox and unpredictable Donald Trump is, and even some very conventional candidates in the past, like John McCain and George Bush, have thrown us wild cards like Sarah Palin and Dan Quayle.
Yeah, of those three that we just talked about, is there one or two among them that seem to bring the most to the ticket, either electorally or stylistically?
Well, I mean, I think for Mike Pence, you can say he might help shore up the conservative base because he's got very solid conservative credentials. He's not a big personality, and he doesn't really deliver a state because Indiana's, if Republicans lose Indiana, it's all over anyway. So it's not that critical a battleground. And then I think Chris Christie has a good relationship with Donald Trump. Newt Gingrich has been supportive, but he's also another guy, a somewhat unpredictable guy with really high negatives, and he's also getting up in years. So it's hard to see exactly what he brings to the ticket other than some governing experience for sure.
All right. Well, I think we'll leave our discussion there. And Craig, will be following your reports next week from the Republican Convention. You can find those at jsonline.com/politics. Thanks, Craig.
Okay, see you then.
All right, we're back now and joined by columnist Dan Bice and political reporter Mary Spicuzza to talk a little bit more about the presidential race and what's ahead at the convention. And there is some news in the last few minutes even of various news outlets. The New York Times and others are reporting that Donald Trump is going to choose Mike Pence, the Indiana governor, as the vice president. So assuming that's true, let's talk about Mike Pence. What do we know about this guy?
He was here in 2014 to speak at the Republican convention. So you and I were both at the event. Right. He was not an amazing speaker. I walked away thinking, that it was sort of dry, and there wasn't a whole lot to what he said. But I guess that's part of what is interesting Trump. They are referring to him as unflappable and calm, and he was definitely calm.
Very calm.
in his talk here. He also spoke at the NRA convention, and he spoke immediately before Sheriff Clark did. And watching the two back to back, I walked away thinking Clark was a way better speaker and was much more impressive than Pence was. But Pence, I guess the Indianapolis Star's reporting, has dropped his re-election bid. So I think the thing is happening.
Yeah. So apparently he's not one that's going to overshadow Donald Trump. Not that anyone
that
could.
is probably
what
safe
does he
to
bring?
say.
He's got bona fide conservative credentials, might shore up people's support there. He's a governor, though. In the past, people have talked about does Donald Trump need someone who can get things done in Washington, who knows the ins and outs of Congress?
I think right now Donald Trump is probably very concerned about winning over conservatives, getting Republicans to vote for him, not flip over to Hillary Clinton. So I think at this point, somebody who will agree to be the vice presidential nominee is one thing, and somebody who will agree who has conservative support is another.
And he is very conservative, and in fact, he got into some controversy over the religious test issue that had come up during his race. But it is interesting. During the primary, he didn't endorse Trump. He endorsed Ted Cruz. It was late. It took him a long time, but he eventually endorsed Ted Cruz shortly before Trump killed Cruz in the
Right, this
Indiana
was sort
primary.
of the last showdown before Ted Cruz and John Kasich got out of the election.
And everyone was saying, Pence isn't taking a stand, and he took a stand, with the wrong guy.
Let's talk a little bit more about the rest of the convention starting next week. So it's going to have a Wisconsin flavor. Paul Ryan's the chair, and then Reince Priebus, of course, is the chair of the party.
And they announced the speakers today. There are five speakers from Wisconsin. So it's sort of a cheesehead convention. As you said, Ryan will be speaking. Reince Priebus obviously is going to be speaking. Governor Walker is speaking. Sheriff David Clark is speaking, and Sean Duffy. So, and it's an interesting mix of people who've been supportive and not quite so supportive of Donald Trump. Probably the most supportive in that group is Sheriff Clark, who says he's all in, and probably the only person I've heard who supported Sheriff Clark in his remarks about the so-called Mexican federal judge.
And he's not even technically a Republican, so there's that.
Probably the only Democrat speaking at the convention. And then you have, Paul Ryan, who's endorsed him but has been very critical of Donald Trump. Scott Walker, who's taken his time endorsing him.
And has been very, it's basically like he's better than she is.
So how do they, though, when they're going to have to get up there at this convention, and the whole purpose of it to get on TV is to bolster your candidate, Donald Trump. So what do they say?
I think it's less bolstering your candidate than attacking your foe, because that's been the approach that you've seen with Scott Walker. It's very much, it's not, that we love Donald Trump. It's we need to stop Hillary Clinton. That's been the message. It is true. Sean Duffy, who's going to be speaking, has said that he has the template for the conservative movement and did endorse him in May. So I expect him to be more on board and to give a stronger pro-Trump message. But I think Scott Walker's message will be very much that we need to stop Hillary from being elected.
And both Representative Duffy and Donald Clark are very familiar with TV. They're very familiar with being on TV, both former reality TV stars. I think Duffy will probably give a pretty animated speech. And he's also talked about how he feels like Republicans are too much of downers, too flat, let me show you this spreadsheet about the debt, and talked about how they need to engage voters.
I mean, that has been Scott Walker's message, that we need to have an affirmative message, but he's not been very affirmative on Donald Trump. It's been very negative message. I mean, he even criticized Ron Johnson for not having a strong message. So,
well, let me ask both of you on this. So give me your best case and worst case scenario for the convention in terms of the party, in terms of what can they get out of it. Best case is what?
Well, I mean, that you get a bump. Like Bill Clinton got a big bump out of his convention, a huge bump. But in fact, most candidates don't get a bump. The worst case scenario is that people don't dial in, that fewer people watch this than watch the All-Star game the other day, and that it has little impact.
Or there's like a coup attempt and they try to nominate and it's all chaos.
I mean, you don't want to get in.
Best case, worst case. I mean, Reince Priebus needs a smooth convention, right?
He does need a smooth convention. I mean, whether or not he runs for to do this again, which is probably going to be a not, but who knows. But I think that he is really trying to crack down on the delegates and make them fall in line and avoid this unbinding thing and, blowing up on national TV.
But smooth can be boring. And boring means little, that there's little impact. I mean, you would hope that there's some sort of news or something there besides Donald Trump. I mean,
but Donald Clint Eastwood wasn't boring. He talked to a chair, but he wasn't exactly.
But it wasn't effective either. All right, well, we'll leave that discussion there because we've got more to get to, including this segment right now, looking at Donald Trump on the Truthometer. We're joined now by Tom Kircher, one of our PolitiFact Wisconsin reporters, to take a look at Donald Trump on the Truthometer, kind of a preview for next week's convention. So, Tom, we took the most recent 5 ratings of Donald Trump. So let's roll through those now. The first one is, he says, Hillary Clinton has been given tens of millions of dollars by countries that, quote, treat women horribly and countries that kill gays, end quote, and that was rated half true.
Yeah, there are several countries, including some in the Middle East, that do those things. But money that was given to the Clinton Foundation by those countries was before she was with the State Department or after, and she certainly didn't get money personally from those countries.
Went to the foundation more than a direct thing. Okay, our next one is we got the highest vote count in the history of the Republican Party, and that was rated mostly true.
Yeah, Trump's correct on that number. The missing context there is he also got more votes against him than any other nominee or presumptive nominee in the past.
All right. And this is another one who says, Trump says, you know what, Saddam Hussein did well, he killed terrorists. And that was rated mostly false.
Yeah, I mean, there's less terrorism under Hussein than there is now in Iraq. But he certainly, when he went out to kill terrorists for his own interest, he had no hesitation doing that.
All right, and some of the terrorists, if I remember the item correctly, were people that were just opposition people to himself, more so than what we would necessarily describe as a terrorist here from the United States.
Right. If there were terrorists that he needed to kill to help his own interests, he would do that.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Another one, taxpayers are paying a fortune for the use of Air Force One on the campaign trail by President Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, and that was rated mostly true.
Yeah, there's a fact that being an incumbent has its advantages, and so President Obama, even if he's campaigning, is still president. So most of the expenses, some $200,000 an hour, will be picked up by taxpayers. A portion of those expenses when he's campaigning should be picked up either by the Clinton campaign or the Democratic Party.
Okay. And finally, as Secretary of State Hillary Clinton laundered money to Bill Clinton through laureate education while Bill Clinton was an honorary chairman of the group. So that's maybe some unfamiliar things here, but tell us about that one. That was false.
Bill Clinton was the honorary chairman of Laureate Education, which is a for-profit education organization. But the State Department did not make donations to that group. So that's just a false statement on his part.
All right, you can find more of the statements by Donald Trump and, of course, Hillary Clinton and many others at PolitiFactWisconsin.com. And if you have suggestions, send them to us at PolitiFact@JournalSentinel.com. So, thanks, Tom.
You bet.
All right, we're joined now by columnist James Causey from the editorial page. Mary Spaguzza is still here. We're going to shift our focus right now to some of the local and statewide issues. So let's show some numbers now from the same poll yesterday, the Marquette poll on the U.S. Senate race, where Democrat Russ Feingold remains in the lead. Among likely voters, it's 49% to Ron Johnson's 44%. When you go to registered voters, which again is a slightly broader group, it's 48% to 41%. And those numbers have tightened a bit, but that's sort of where they've been. Mary, what's your sense of how that race is progressing? We've had a lot of spending in the past few weeks, and it didn't seem to do too much.
Right. So I think the good news for Senator Ron Johnson is that the race has tightened. The bad news is that he continues to trail former Senator Russ Feingold, and that really has not moved that much considering the spending, the third-party spending in the race. So I can't remember the last time Ron Johnson was ahead in a poll, and I think it's been a long time.
Right. And James, what's your sense on that race from people you talk to and hear from? Are people engaged in that one, or is it so interesting or to follow the presidential race we haven't really gotten too far down the ballot yet?
Well, it's interesting. They just opened Ron Johnson's office right on King Drive, or 3rd Street, and I'm starting to see people buzz around that. For Ron Johnson, he has to really pick it up. It's not looking good for him. For Russ, I think all he has to do is just maintain what he's doing, and I think he can win.
Okay. And do you share that assessment, Mary? I mean, certainly he needs to improve his numbers, and that the demographics or the race, this presidential year race, is much different in terms of the turnout than the other one. So he's at a disadvantage. But what does he need to do to? Should he get on more on the Trump train, less on the Trump train, do more advertising? What should he be working on?
That's a tricky one for him because getting on the Trump train is not going to win over, independent. It's not going to win over moderate Republicans. I guess he can hope that a lot of negative attacks on Russ Feingold lower his numbers a bit, but he's still struggled to have a lot of Wisconsinites know who he is and know, even though he's been trying to do more, he's been on this, national security, he's been talking about veterans, but I think he's really still struggling with people even knowing enough about him to form an opinion.
Isn't it a problem to be in office that long and people still not know who you are? I mean, what does that say for you if you still have an identity problem?
All right, let's shift now to Lincoln Hills. That's the juvenile prison up north, where there's been just a host of problems. And the news this week, Mary, was that Mayor Tom Barrett saying, "Hey, what you should do, state officials, is reopen Ethan Allen School, which is closed 5 years ago. It's much closer." Mm-hmm. What do you see coming from that?
And Milwaukee County officials have said the same thing, at least about closing Lincoln Hills, not necessarily reopening Ethan Allen, but going to a regional approach. The state has been repeatedly saying things are under control. We've got, we're turning things around at Lincoln Hills, but I think the continuous stories that we've heard out of it, there was a really disturbing one that Patrick Marley did this week about a prison psychiatrist and some really inappropriate comments he made about a young woman, given that was, before, but I don't know what it would take, and I don't know that it's possible to turn around people's confidence in Lincoln Hills. And I think for Milwaukee, they're pretty much ready to, pull out.
It seems though, Ethan Allen, while it may sound appealing, isn't, a short-term solution. You'd have to refit the building, hire a staff, move everybody down here, whatever the cost is. James, what do you think is the resolution here? We've got people in a place that is deemed unsafe, and people are concerned about it. How do we resolve that?
Well, I think, for one, you have to close Lincoln Hills. I believe people lost confidence in that facility, and kids are not being treated fairly or safe there. And if people feel that way, I don't think there's no way around that. With Ethan Allen, they're talking about cost and money, but what's more important, putting the cost into a building and making sure kids are safe, or the financial point of view. And I think keeping kids safe and making sure that they serve their time, but that you're working with them is the best alternative.
Yeah, I guess what I'm asking is what, on a practical basis, so even if you said, let's do Ethan Allen and spend whatever it takes to do it, that can't be done today, it can't be done tomorrow, or even next week. So what do we do in the meantime to make sure that the kids up there are safe and yet, pursuing?
Well, in the meantime, you could move beyond just talking about it and start working at trying to get that facility up and going. And you also need to have like total oversight at Lincoln Hills, and I think it's up to us to keep the pressure on people and make sure that the public stays informed of what's going on out there, because the kids don't seem like they're being taken care of.
All right, let's before we move on to winners and losers, let's touch base and talk a little bit about Black Lives Matters. There's been some protests around the country, many of them, including in Milwaukee, on a pretty regular basis. James, do you get the sense that the message is getting through, or is it just, are people talking about it? Are they enthusiastic about it, or what?
Well, yeah, they're talking about it, but the message, what is the message? I think you're still going to have, people have dug into the sand. You're either against it or you're for it. And this is the thing that I have a problem with. I don't know why people can't understand that you could be pro-police and be pro-Black Lives Matter. You could be both. But it seems like there's people believe if you're for Black Lives Matter, you're anti-police. And we have to get beyond that thinking. We all know police are important. They're important in keeping our neighborhoods safe. They're important in a whole lot of aspects. Everybody wants to go home safe too, even the cops and the citizens that they police. But we have to move beyond just you're either on this side or the other side. Yeah,
well, some of these issues, of course, coming to the head at City Hall with the police chief and the mayor and others. I mean, do you feel any sense, Mary, from your coverage over there, that they are feeling pressure to make any changes or specific changes, or is it just kind of business as usual, that the protests are going on and we're moving along?
I think they've been feeling the pressure for a while. I think there's obviously different contingents at City Hall and different aldermen who have pretty strong feelings one way or the other. It's interesting because in California, I don't know if you saw the photo of the police chief holding a Black Lives Matter sign and talking about how he'd been doing community policing and trying to avoid violent confrontations between police and black men, because it's been, it's obviously been a problem around the country. So for Milwaukee, I think we'll just have to, I feel like they've been talking about it for a while, and they're doing this special public safety committee meetings over the summer and trying to come up with a game plan about addressing violence in Milwaukee. They haven't talked specifically about addressing Black Lives Matter, and I'm going to be curious to see what they come up with as an action plan and whether everyone is going to be comfortable with it.
All right, let's go now to our winners and losers segment. And Mary, I'm going to start with you. So can you give us your winner of the week?
Well, obviously Paul Ryan has not had an easy year so far with Donald Trump as the nominee. That said, he just announced that he has about $9.75 million in cash on hand for his reelection bid. So I think that's probably making him feel a little bit better this week. So I'm going to say he's a winner.
His opponent, how does his opponent in the primary, how much does he have on hand?
That remains to be seen. The filing deadline is midnight. When I checked yesterday evening, I did not see his numbers up, but I think it's safe to say they're going to be
somewhere south of 9.75
somewhere south
million.
Of 9.75 million, I think, is a safe bet.
Yeah. All right, James, your winner of the week.
My winners of the week are the NBA players who took a stand at the ESPYs last night. Carmelo Anthony, Chris Paul, LeBron James, and Dwayne Wade, who said that star athletes need to be a part of the solution when it comes to curbing violence in neighborhoods and talking about Black Lives Matter and all these things. They need to be more included in the conversation.
All right, and James, let's get your loser of the week.
My loser of the week is anyone who uses the argument that black people kill black people, therefore we should not be talking about this Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, that's one of the most bizarre arguments out there. White people kill white people, Hispanics kill Hispanics. Violence committed on people is based on proximity more so than anything else. And so using that argument is just ridiculous. Everybody wants to go home safe.
All right, and Mary, let's get your loser of the week.
The new Marquette poll showed that Governor Walker is still very far underwater with approval ratings. I believe it was 38% down from 39 in the most recent poll. So that is not a good number for him, obviously. And so I'm going to call him our loser of the week.
But just to follow up on that a little bit, what can he do, right? Okay, no one's talking about state issues right now. The legislature's not in session. He can travel around and do things, but what does he do to get people's approval ratings back up?
Well, one criticism he got from former Senator Tim Cullen this week was that he has been a no-show at Lincoln Hills. He has not physically gone and traveled to the site. He said, the day after that story broke, the governor should have been up there. telling people that he is going to fix things and ensure that people are safe. His spokesman said that he has not been there, but that he's hired a new DOC head who's been, turning things around. But again, I think something like that, where he is, out calling for change in the community, traveling around the state, and he's been traveling around the state, but a lot of private events. I don't know that that's going to win over Democrats still, but I think being a visible presence helps.
All right, let's go now to our viewer questions, and we've got several here. So the first one is from Bob in Bayview, and the question came in earlier: is Newt Gingrich, Chris Christie? How will Republicans get excited about these choices? Well, now we know the choice is apparently Mike Pence. James, what do you think? Can people get excited about Mike Pence if you're a Republican?
I don't know how much more you can. I'm surprised Chris Christie wasn't the pick. I mean, this guy, he comes out as the ultimate loser. What did he get out of this?
Well, wait and see if he's Attorney General or not.
I doubt it. Well, we'll see. But Pence seems pretty boring, but I don't know.
All right.
I don't know that Pence is going to rile up the crowd at the convention. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Well, that's what Donald Trump's for, right?
Right, exactly. He's got that covered.
Okay, so this is from Betty Lou, who says, why is Sheriff Clark speaking at the Republican convention? Doesn't he run as a Democrat? James, I'm going to tee up another one for you. All
right, well, he served it right down the middle of the plate, and I'm hitting it. I mean, is he really a Democrat? I mean, this is going to be perfect for him. I could do his spiel right now. Yada, yada, yada. Black Lives Matter is a terrorist group. Yada, yada, yada. We need to push for a blue bill for the cops. Yada, yada, yada. Filling the rest.
But, I mean, there is a long history, Mary, of at conventions when they'll say, here's someone from the other party, either ostensibly or literally, who comes over and supports the ones. Do you see them taking David Clark and saying, look, this is a Democratic African-American sheriff from Milwaukee.
Who speaks at the NRA conventions and is very outspoken on arming yourselves.
All of you guys are going to pick up on those nuances at the time.
I think it's safe to say that whatever he says at the convention, it will not be your typical Democratic politician's speech.
Exactly.
All right, and James, I'm going to give this one to you first. This is from Disappointed. He says, so Bernie finally linked up with Hillary Clinton. Yeah. Forgive me for not being excited. Why should I, as a Bernie supporter, vote for her? And you have been a Bernie supporter.
I've been
and you can do that because you're on the editorial page. Mary is not any supporter, nor am I. But why do people should a Bernie supporter get excited about Hillary Clinton when Bernie spent all these many months saying that she's the personification of what's wrong with Wall Street and down the line?
All right, 2 words for you: Donald Trump. That's why they should join up and be Hillary supporters. That's the only thing I can say on that. I love Bernie Sanders. I thought he presented himself well, but Donald Trump, that's all you have to say.
What do you think? I mean, Hillary Clinton doesn't need just Bernie Sanders support. She needs some of his voters to really get enthusiastic and come out and vote. Do you see that? Or do you see that not yet happening? Or does she have to change her message, perhaps, to...
I think she's already changed her message quite a bit and, echoed some of the Bernie Sanders comments throughout the campaign. And, Bernie's already said that his campaign was successful for Democrats embracing things like $15 an hour minimum wage. So I think what she needs to do is probably maybe do some more events with Bernie Sanders. I think that some of his supporters are going to say she's better than Donald Trump and come over. I wouldn't be surprised if some go independent. There are, there's not to stereotype millennials, but I know that a lot of millennials are not jumping on the Hillary train.
Yeah. All right, well, that's our last question, where we'll leave our discussion for today. We'll be back next week at this time with a look at the Republican convention. Donald Trump's acceptance speech will be next Thursday night. And look ahead at the Democratic convention, which is just 1 week following that. In the meantime, please follow us on Twitter and all of our coverage at jsonline.com/politics. See you next week.